The question, who am I? So, first of all, why bother with this question? This is something many people ask. For instance, if I tell someone to ask the question, who am I? They simply say, I am XYZ, whatever the name is. And they say, why should I bother with anything more? I am XYZ and that's it. And the truth is, if someone literally stops with that, if someone says that I am XYZ and um, simply use the word I, which is the first person pronoun, to refer to the name and nothing else, then such a person does not need any kind of inquiry or questioning, who am I? But the truth is, for almost all of us, the word I is not just the name or a pronoun, but it is conflated with many identities. We first of all identify with the body and how the body looks, and whether the body is healthy or sick, strong or weak, good looking or not. So, all these various identities of the body are conflated with I. Then the same is true with thoughts. The various thoughts which comprise identities of various kinds are also conflated with the I. For example, the I is associated with a nation, with a religion, with color, caste, race, gender, and political ideology, and so on. So one says, I am Indian or American, I am Hindu or Christian, I am left leaning or right leaning, and so on and so forth. So the I is not simply left alone as a personal pronoun for the name, but it is, as we can see, conflated with so many identities. This is the truth of all of us. So, first we have to simply be aware of what we call the I to be, right? And that is where even the need for this question becomes apparent. Because if we are aware that I am carrying all these various avatars of I, some consciously and many subconsciously, then I can see how the various avatars of I are causing different levels of suffering and discontentment and being feeling a sense of stress and no peace and all the rest. So that is the first thing to be aware of, is that the I is not left alone by us, but all of us superimpose many identities on the I. So then the question becomes, is it true what I take myself to be? So that is where the importance of the question, who am I, comes up. Because then, if I say anything about the I, we can clearly see how it is partial and false. So the first thing, of course, is with the body. When we say I am the body, um, and we identify with the body so strongly, but we can clearly see that I'm not the body. Why? Because even linguistically, we talk in a way where we dissociate from the body. We say, my body is sick, my body is healthy, my body is feeling light today, feeling heavy today, and so on. So, in a certain subconscious way, even linguistically, we do not call the body as I. We have a certain separation from the body and we are aware. And yet, the irony is that we are so strongly identified with the body also subconsciously that we feel elated or depressed if someone either praises the body or um, makes fun of it, or makes even a innocuous comment like, hey, looks like you put on some weight today, or since I last met you, or something like that. All of these comments of various kinds about the body are somehow causing a strong identification, and therefore a sense of feeling either flattered or depressed, and so on. So, and that we can see how it causes unnecessary stress and suffering. And so we can, if we clearly see that, we can negate that this identification with the body is false, because I am aware of the body, and what I call myself as I is something that remains while the body keeps on changing. The body is not what it was when I was a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old, and so on. And the same is true with thoughts, what we call the mind. Mind is not even an entity, but only a collection of thoughts. At any given time, there are thoughts floating in the brain, and we think there is an entity called the mind, but in reality there are only disparate set of thoughts which float around, and we at any given time identify with a thought and say that I am that thought. For example, one may be conditioned to identify with a nation, or with a religion, or with a political ideology, or with one's career, and so on and so forth. So one says, I am a lawyer, or I am an engineer, or I am left or right, and so many things. And here again, we see that in reality, I am aware of these identities. The identities come and go. For example, even if I am trained to be an engineer, I am not always having the thought that I am an engineer. The identity called engineer comes and goes. And the next moment, maybe the identity called father comes, or the identity called a partner comes, or the identity called a member of a particular nation comes. So we see that even the thoughts which comprise identities are constantly changing. And therefore, if something is constantly changing, and sometimes they not only change, but sometimes they even completely reverse themselves. So, but what remains fixed is that I am aware of these identities. I am aware of the identity that rises up as being part of a family, and then being part of a nation, or being uh, alone, or being with a group, and all the rest. So, this is again a way in which we can negate all the false identities created by thought. So this is something we can grasp from the head itself, because when we apply ourselves carefully and observe carefully, we can notice that the I is falsely identified with the body, the I is falsely identified with the various thoughts called the mind, and all of these I am not. So then the question becomes, who am I? Because I have negated everything that I am not. And when I ask that fundamental question, who am I? Who is aware? Because we mentioned that there is an awareness that remains constant, and that is aware of the various changing identities of the body, or the changing identities of thought. And this awareness remains that which is constant, and uh, which is ever present. So what is this awareness is essentially then the question, who am I? And here, if I produce any answer to that question from the head, that question and that answer is also something I'm aware of. So we can easily see that we would be caught in what is technically called an infinite regress. Because no matter what answer I give, I am aware of this answer. And the answer is, even the word awareness is an answer coming from thought. And I am aware of this process of the question as well as the answer that comes from thought. So one realizes that while one can negate everything that I am not through this process of inquiry, when one goes into the depth of it, thought is pushed to its limitation. We can clearly see that thought cannot answer this question. It can only be helpful, perhaps, to negate what I am not. But what I am is something thought can never answer, because of the simple fact that any answer provided by thought is something I am aware of, and therefore I am not that thought. When I see this clearly, and therefore I see the limitation of logic and thought, just by seeing that limitation clearly, of the inability of thought to ever answer this question, because again there are so many fancy words people can come up with, like they can say I am Brahman, or I am infinite consciousness, or I am supreme bliss. There are so many terms people come up with, but every single um, adjective that I come up with is simply coming from memory, from what I have learned, from my knowledge, which is simply thought. and I am aware of this answer coming. So therefore, I am not that. So I am not the Brahman that I am talking of. And therefore, any answer that comes, even that supposedly points to the ultimate, is again just a word. And the word is not the actual thing it points to in this particular case. Therefore, it can be very clearly seen that the thought or the process of memory which I'm using through words to answer this question can only take me so far, and I hit against that limitation. And when I actually clearly see that I cannot ever use any word to capture what I am, then what comes about is a silence. And that silence can never be captured in words by definition. And that is what is the opening of the heart. When we say heart, we don't refer necessarily to the physical heart, but to the sense of silence where thought is quiet, where the brain is quiet, there is a certain stillness. Because not by suppressing thought, not by trying to control thought, but by actually inquiring and coming to the limitation of thought, where thought understands that it is not having the ability to go beyond that, by simply letting thought explore to the point where thought cannot explore any further, one comes to that silence. And that silence is what we call the heart. It is felt here also near the physical heart as a sense of being. But what is more important is that silence. And that silence of the heart or of this awareness, or any word we can use, because all of these are only words that are approximate and not the actual thing, is what is that journey from head to heart through this question, who am I? And when we reach that space of the heart where there are no answers, where there is no attempt to even answer, because one sees the futility of this whole process of questioning and answering, and therefore one, by realizing that all answers are false and the questioner is still there, and therefore through that direct awareness of the falseness of the answers provided by thought and the silence that comes about, one can touch this pure silence of the heart. And in that space, what we notice is, because thought is not present, all the identities of the I are not present. In that space, there cannot be any identity that divides the I to be a particular nationality or a religion or caste, or identify with the body and be worried about the body, and or anything associated with the body, whether it's family or friends and all of that. But one simply remains in that silence where everything is still. And that silence is our very nature. And that is our inner being. And there is no seeking of peace, no seeking of happiness, because there is peace and happiness right there. And by abiding in that space, we are able to dissociate from the activities of the body and the mind. And the more we abide in that space, the activities of the body and mind take place on their own. Because it's not that the body, just because I'm still, the body doesn't stop breathing, it doesn't stop digesting the food it ate, and it doesn't stop doing all the various functions it does. And similarly, the senses don't stop functioning. I still see, I still hear, I still smell, I still taste, I still touch. And similarly, I can respond to stimuli, I can act. And in fact, because there is that silence, and that silence is uh, not taking attention away from this moment into sustaining all the false identities, action also becomes very intelligent, which is to say, it is precise and it is fully present in the present. So that space touching that space of silence within and action without, action that is unaffected by sustaining the ego or unaffected by the calculations of the ego and therefore pure, is the space which we call the space of the heart. So when we say, "Who am I?" it is not, therefore, we can see an intellectual process, but it is a process that may start from the head, but it takes us to our very heart, our very being, which cannot be captured in words. And by abiding in that space of silence, we are naturally in the peace of our being and acting with that peace. And this can essentially be called the process of this inquiry. So we'll stop there and take some questions.
So someone once said, to find the supreme, you have to be extreme. So it sort of sounds like that, where you push the thoughts to its limitations, and when the
Yes.
intellectual curiosity stops, and then
Yeah.
what is left is your being.
Yeah, that's a nice. Yeah, that's very nice. To realize the supreme, one has to go to the extreme, and that's so true, because to realize the supreme, one has to come to the end of thought. In fact, another way to look at even the word Vedanta. Normally, Vedanta is translated as the ultimate knowledge, but the literal word means Veda means knowledge and Anta means end. So it's actually ending of knowledge. So it's not the supreme knowledge even, it is the ending of all knowledge. Because knowledge is nothing but thought. And when all knowledge ends, when all attempt to gather knowledge ends, when all attempt to answer through knowledge ends, is when realization happens. So the inner meaning of the word Vedanta is actually what we just talked about, that extreme. To go to that extreme where thought is completely absent. And one other point to clarify here is that this is why it is important to not indulge in the process of gathering knowledge, because that is actually taking us in the opposite direction. Our The whole endeavor is to come to the ending of knowledge and not to accumulate knowledge. So the ending of knowledge is a process that we can come only if we stay with a simple inquiry of what is it that is aware of the thoughts arising, and going to the extreme of what the answer is, which can never come through from thought. So yeah, that's a nice quote and very pertinent.
So self-inquiry has also been described as a very scientific process. So wherein, like, when you negate, it's it actually makes a lot of sense, right? You start the process of negation. So I guess you have to go through that. You have to meet that end, right? You have to go to that end of the road, and so that it satisfies you fully, but
Right.
until it doesn't satisfy you.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be considered, it is a scientific process in the real sense. Again, not in the sense of the way science is understood as a way of just accumulating knowledge, but a true scientific process of inquiring with great curiosity and perseverance and going with it. It's inner. It's not the science that tries to understand the outer, but it's the kind of science that understands the inner space
Mhm.
and seeing the limitation of understanding itself.
There's a question: is there a role for thought mind in this "Who am I" quest?
Yes, we spoke about how negation is done by thought. So it is, if we are keenly aware, we can see thought can be useful in being aware of itself, which is to say, thought can be used to realize that I am not what I take myself to be. I am not the body. That is clearly, uh, by thinking clearly, we can realize that. We don't need to do anything mystical about it. Clear thought makes it very clear, or makes it very obvious that I am not the body. Same is true with thought itself. Thought makes it clear that I'm not the thought because I'm aware of the process of thought. So any thought that I take myself to be, as I said, all identities, all various versions of the I take myself to be, all of that I can negate through thought by simply realizing that I am not all of that. So yes, to that extent, thought is useful. But when it uh, tries to positively answer anything, uh, if we are again keenly using thought, even we can see that I am not what I'm answering. So whatever answer thought provides, thought can itself be aware that it's not the right answer because I'm aware of that answer, and there is an awareness that's ever present in which this answer comes and goes, no matter what, how profound the answer may sound. So to that extent, thought is useful. Yeah. So to sum it up, as we said, once we realize the limitation of thought by this process of inquiry, then naturally we uh, bump into that silence. What is there is that silence, because thought, as we said, goes to its extreme, goes to its limit, and we are not able to satisfactorily answer this question, who am I, through thought, because whatever answer comes, I'm aware of it. And by the process, I hit upon the silence of the heart, and that silent space is that of love and peace and compassion, because there is, because the ego is completely absent, there is no selfishness in the sense it is normally seen. And therefore, when there is no sense of the ego, there is no sense of the other two. And every entity that comes about is seen as an expression of that silence. And therefore, there is a natural sense of love and compassion and a sense of peace that pervades, and it manifests in our action too. So it's important to not try to even practice virtues such as love and compassion, because when we try to practice them, we again start from the point of taking I to be something that practices these virtues. But if we can simply abide in the silence of my very being, then these virtues manifest on their own. So that is the essential process of inquiry called Who Am I? And that is also the process of pure surrender, because we can see that when I am completely silent and still, what operates is the divine energy without any division, without any identification. And that energy that operates, that makes all activities possible, is acting on its own. And because of the silence that is present in the heart, there is no attempt to want anything. And the pure lack of wanting is the state of surrender. And whatever happens, happens, and there is no resistance to what happens. And that state of surrender comes about through this process of inquiry. So, who am I? Starting from the, may start from the head, but it reaches the heart through silence and through surrender. So, with that, we will end today. Thank you.